hola, guten morgen. You guys are the first people I've spoken to today. Will that result in a complete lack of filter? Probably. Let's screw around and find out. And welcome back to another video. It's probably a good thing that I'm feeling a little bit unfiltered today, because any video that includes this book has got to come under the category of brutally honest. But the brutal honesty of Jeanette McCurdy's memoir isn't actually all that unique. Instead, it belongs to a tradition of brutally honest memoirs written by women who have survived and endured, be that complicated relationships with their mothers or their bodies or their own minds. And so, in partnership with Ana Luisa and their Mother's Day campaign centering inspirational women, that is what I am here to bring you today. Places to go after you have finished reading I'm Glad My Mum Died and you're desperate for something exactly like it. Because that is the one big complaint that I hear when people finish this memoir. They're like, where is the rest of it? I need more. But before we get into it, let me first introduce you to the wonders of Ana Luisa while we watch my mum discover the wonders of Ana Luisa while she opens her own Mother's Day gift. If you've been around my channel for a while, then you know that I am one of Ana Luisa's VIPs, and they are some of my absolute favourite people to ever work with. And I have told you in the past how sustainable they are, that they offset 100% of their carbon emissions, and that all of their manufacturing practices are centred around making sure that they preserve our planet. But I haven't told you about some of my other favourite features of Ana Luisa. While you may know that all of Ana Luisa's pieces are made from recycled materials, you may not also know that all of their pieces are put through rigorous strength and humidity testing. This testing ensures that Ana Luisa's pieces are as long lasting and as hard wearing as they are possible to be, meaning that you can potentially invest in a piece that you can own for a lifetime. Their pieces are also tarnish resistant, which means that if you are an ADHD nightmare like me, who is constantly bouncing off and bashing on surfaces and catching necklaces, your goodies are guaranteed to keep their shine for longer than any other pieces on the market. And what's more, you can purchase with absolute confidence knowing that all of Ana Luisa's pieces are backed with a 2-year guarantee against allergies, against breakage, against tarnishing, and a whole lot more. They will either replace your favourite piece or they will reimburse you with no awkward questions asked. I literally wear Ana Luisa every single day, and now so probably will my mum. Ana Luisa's pieces start at just $39 and they offer worldwide shipping. So if you would like to pick up some pieces for a lifetime for yourself or for some inspirational people in your life, then you can use my code LiteraryDiversions20 at checkout for 20% off. So with all that said and my mother suitably bejeweled, let's get on to the books. The first book that I'm going to recommend to you is Motherwell by Deborah Orr, a title which endlessly amuses me because it is both the small Scottish town in which Deborah Orr grew up in and also a play on the relationship that she has with her mother. The reason that I picked this one up is because Motherwell is not a million miles away from where I grew up. It is a town which very briefly expanded rapidly when the steel industry hit, and then very quickly the steel industry left Motherwell and it left the area impoverished with hundreds and hundreds of people out of work. And much of Deborah's memory of childhood was marred by this poverty and deprivation cycle that the town ended up spiralling in. But the thing that's really interesting to me about Motherwell, and the thing that really links it to McCurdy's memoir, is Deborah's relationship with her mother. Wynne was an English woman who married a Scottish man and moved to the small town that he came from with absolutely no reference for what her life was going to be like. She never drove or had any other experiences outside of Motherwell again, and because of that she held on to Deborah with a fierceness. Even though Deborah's mother's life was stopped in its tracks by choosing a man and choosing this tiny insular life which was full of fear and comparison, quiet desperation, the need to not let anybody else know that things were going on behind closed doors, despite the fact that her life had taken that turn, she bitterly resented Deborah for wanting to make different choices for herself. But breaking away from a mother who is emotionally completely reliant on you is not actually as easy as it sounds. Deborah Orr goes through much the same experience as Jeanette McCurdy does when she looks back at her childhood. There are those rosy parts at the beginning where her mother is everything and she is always in her mother's orbit, and so everything that is important to her mother is inherently then important to her. Realising later on that that kind of emotional incest, that thing where you live your life through your child, is inherently abusive. And the thing that really gets me about Motherwell is that when Deborah Orr introduces you to her childhood, exactly like Jeanette McCurdy, her initial recollections of it are just so sunny, so happy. She has some of the same sensory memories that I do of timber houses, of the smell of the gardens, the sounds of a Scottish childhood, and then all of a sudden she starts to peel layers away like an onion and you're left feeling so raw and so vulnerable and so exposed. It is such a good memoir and I am so glad that I found it this year. Next up, ironically, is another Scottish memoir that I read this year. It is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. Fern Brady is a Scottish comedian who is only a couple of years younger than me, grew up just a town away from where I grew up, and who I discovered when reading this book had accessed some of the exact same mental health services that I had as a teenager. I did not expect when I picked this one up for it to be so completely close to home. Strong Female Character is Fern Brady's story of her childhood growing up again in a very small, very impoverished Scottish town with a neurodivergence. Because Fern is autistic, something which in the 90s when we were growing up was not something that was regularly diagnosed in girls. In fact, to be fair, autism was not something which was regularly being diagnosed in boys either. But it was far more regularly being diagnosed in boys because of course all of the testing and all of the models and all of the research that had been done was on young boys. Fern's memoir was for me incredibly difficult to read because her memories of growing up as a child with a neurodivergence in a neurotypical family and feeling like actually everybody just really disliked her. Just rather than seeing her as a complex person, they saw her as a problem child, an annoying child, a child who is unlike the rest of the family and is actually kind of fundamentally unwanted, is essentially my own experience. That was not just hard to read but also scary to read because does anybody ever actually have a unique experience? No. And although there is a lot that happens to Fern after she leaves university, from a career in stripping to the way that she got into comedy, the book continually harks back to Fern's relationship with her parents, which is where fundamentally everything went wrong for her because there was no structure or care and support there for her to go back to. Her parents swung wildly from desperately trying to make her conform to just throwing her out of the house and making her somebody else's problem. And fundamentally what Fern talks a lot about in this memoir is inherited emotional abuse. The way that Fern's mother deals with Fern's emotions by trying to suppress them and just make them stop and make them go away by emotional manipulation and crying and saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" is something that she has learned from her mother and something that is like an inherent inherited trait in women in the area in which I grew up. And reading about it from someone else who went through almost an identical experience as me was really painful, but also really healing. So yeah, this one is definitely going to be on my top 10 books of 2023. Expect to see it again a lot. Next up we have When I Had a Little Sister by Catherine Simpson. I read this memoir a couple of years ago and I still legitimately think about it once a week. I think I have basically recommended it to every one of my friends who has even a passing interest in this genre. On a Christmas shopping trip in December 2013, Catherine steps outside of a shop laden with gifts and takes a phone call from her father, who tells her that her sister the night before has taken her own life. But this phone call, while also coming as an immense shock and bringing with it a ton of horrific grief, also comes as something of a relief to Catherine, who has been waiting years for this phone call. Catherine's sister Trisha had dealt with debilitating depression her entire life and she had never left the tiny farm that they grew up on. She'd simply moved out to a converted barn that was her own kind of little flat. And she very much still relied on their elderly father for everything, for her only contact with the outside world. So Catherine takes the drive down to her family farm, which which is quite literally a tiny little farm in the middle of the English countryside in the middle of nowhere, to help her dad to plan her sister's funeral and also to sort through her very chaotic things. But what Catherine finds when she gets there is not what she expected to find, because in amongst the mess of Trisha's life, which outwardly just looks kind of like a disaster, there is one pristine, perfectly kept room filled with beautiful gowns. And there is hidden away in Trisha's things diaries. Diaries which go all the way back from their childhood together to the present day, which tell a completely different story of Catherine and Trisha's childhood than Catherine remembers. As somebody who grew up as an only child, this memoir was absolutely fascinating to me. There was nobody else in my lived life experience who had gone through the same things as I had. There was nobody else to compare notes to and to say, like, that was really screwed up, wasn't it? But Catherine did have that in Trisha. Catherine did have a person who went through all of the strange traumas of their family with her, and yet they had such completely different views of every single thing that had happened. Every huge life event that they had gone through, Trisha had viewed totally differently. Catherine's deconstruction of her own childhood and reconstruction of it with Trisha's narrative factored in, and it's so cleverly done. The relationship with Catherine and Trisha's mother once again plays a massive part in this memoir. All the tiny little hurts and tiny little abuses which Catherine herself had just sort of taken as, okay, this is a thing that we went through, had really shaped Trisha's reality and how she thought about the world. And so of course Catherine herself then ends up with the question of, if she had seen these things earlier, if she had seen things from Trisha's point of view, could she possibly have made Trisha's life any different? This one should literally come with a free box of tissues just strapped to the back, so I'm warning you before you go into it. Next up, I have another memoir which really jives with the way that Jeanette McCurdy sees fame. This is Why Did You Stay by Rebecca Humphries. She is a British actress, but that is not the thing that she is most famous for. The thing that she is most famous for is her boyfriend who cheated on her in the media. Allow me to explain. Rebecca Humphries at the beginning of this memoir was dating a UK comedian, and he was invited onto the TV show Strictly Come Dancing. Strictly Come Dancing, in case you haven't heard of it, is like Dancing with the Stars in the US. It is possibly the biggest show on British TV, wherein one celebrity gets paired up with one professional dancer. At the beginning of this show, they were warned, both of them, that the tabloids would chase them everywhere, that because this was the biggest show in the UK, they were going to be under extreme scrutiny. And yet, despite that, her boyfriend still had an affair with the dancer who he was paired with, and they were pictured kissing outside of a nightclub. A picture which then made it into the news the next day and was the only thing that anybody was talking about. She was forced to go completely dark on all of her social medias, as all of these different opinions about what her boyfriend had done to her just swirled around the internet. In all of it, she released only one statement which essentially said, "Thank you for your good wishes. I am now in a safe place. If you are also in an abusive situation, here are some resources that you can use, and also I took the cat." And that one statement spoke volumes, but it wasn't until several years later when Rebecca released this memoir when we actually realised the depths of the things that she had gone through. The memoir is entitled Why Did You Stay? Because this was one of the pieces of feedback that she got, I think, on Twitter to her statement. Like, if it was so bad, why did you stay? And Rebecca answers that question absolutely brilliantly by running two separate timelines concurrently in this memoir. So we have the before of when it happened and immediately as it is happening, and we follow these two timelines back and forth as you see the things that Rebecca is accepting in the present, which are all incredibly screwed up. Her emotions and her actions don't really make any sense given the situation that she's in, and from outside looking in, it really does look like she is a little bit unhinged. It looks like the things that she's doing, the kind of like tantrums that she's throwing, the huge volumes of emotion that she is having and going through are misplaced. They don't feel like they have just organically come from this one incident, and that's because they haven't. They've come from years and years of this relationship being systematically psychologically abusive, and as we go back to the beginning of their relationship and see how it builds up, you see the two incidents literally colliding in the middle, and it's just so smart. It is so well done. There was times in this memoir when I genuinely felt physically sick, because as we are in the sort of present day, we can see things happening and you can see Rebecca having a reaction, but after the first couple of chapters of this memoir, you know that you're going to get the how we got here. You know you're going to see exactly what kind of abuse that she took to get to this place, and the anticipation of that literally made me feel ill. And although it is absolutely harrowing, it's such an empowering memoir, because in finally telling her side of the story, she allows herself to stop being silent. She allows herself to actually sit in some of the feelings that she didn't want to dissect at the time, and you watch her slowly put her life back together. But also what I appreciate about this, and exactly the same thing that I appreciated in I'm Glad My Mum Died, is that there's no happily ever after at the end of the memoir, because it's a life that's still being lived. Rebecca's still trying to put herself back together and work through the things that happened to her. There is essentially no end to this. We don't know how the journey is going to end, and so the way that she infuses hope at the end of this memoir is just really cool. Next up is a memoir that I hadn't talked about for years on my channel, and then all of a sudden I seem to be mentioning it here, there and everywhere. If you watched my bookshelf tour, it was the first memoir that I pulled out on my non-fiction shelves, and that is Blue Nights by Joan Didion. This was my very first introduction to Joan Didion, and it started a complete obsession and a systematic reading of her backlist. Blue Nights is sort of one of a companion of memoirs that Joan Didion has written about her experience with grief and loss, and looking back on a relationship once it is gone and not having the ability to change anything. The other one in that is The Year of Magical Thinking, where she talks about her husband and their relationship and how she lost her husband. But Blue Nights is about her daughter Quintana Roo. Quintana passed away as an adult from a really random and complicated illness that happened really quickly, and because of the way that she died, Joan Didion had absolutely zero ability to make anything right with her, to have any last conversations, to tell her that she loved her in a way that was actually out loud and concrete and used those actual words. And so instead what she's left with, much like in When I Had a Little Sister, is going back through Quintana's things and looking at their relationship as she dissects Quintana's life. The thing that I find really arresting about this memoir, which is, by the way, so short, it is so incredibly short and yet it packs such a hard punch, is that Quintana was actually adopted. And so what Joan Didion does in this book is not just look at the life that she has with her daughter, but the question of how her daughter came into her life. She looks at the idea of whether she should have been a mother or not, and whether she was actually in the place to give the kind of care and comfort that she was supposed to. She looks back on her failures with a scalpel, in a way that I assume a lot of mothers must do when they look at their adult children and think about the way that they have become people. But she is so brutally honest, the most honest, about the reality that she wasn't a very good mum, and she didn't give Quintana all of the things that she really should have, and that the choices that she made as a mother were centered around her and her career and the places that she wanted to be and the things that she wanted to do, and Quintana always took a back seat to that. And in doing this sort of deep dive into how she failed, she also kind of does a deep dive into what motherhood is supposed to be, what you're supposed to create as a mother for your child, and whether we have essentially been sold a lie in that there are only two extremes, where you can center yourself or center your child, and there's absolutely nothing in between, where the two of you can coexist as full beings. Again, as an adopted person, I had never seen a memoir before this that looked so forensically into the way that adoption as a process can feel. It's super refreshing to see someone, especially of Joan Didion's generation, be like, yeah, I screwed up. I did not do what I should have done. And here's all the ways that that happened. I often think about this memoir when people tell me that they're like too old to change, or like they're stuck in their ways but they're quite happy with that. They don't need to develop any further as a person. I'm like, but look what it could be. Next up on my list, talking about motherhood coming from the perspective of a mother, I have I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. Maggie O'Farrell is quite a famous and prolific UK novelist. Most recently, I think the thing that you'll recognise her for is Hamnet, which won a bunch of prizes. And ironically, when I picked up Maggie O'Farrell's memoir, I had never actually read any of the fiction that she had written, but lovely spouse Harry had. And so we both read the memoir from two completely different points of view, and both of us had our mind completely blown. So I Am is subtitled, I think, 13 Brushes with Death, and it's structured around the 13, I think, events that Maggie O'Farrell had in her life, where her life nearly catastrophically ended very prematurely. Some of these include serious illnesses in childhood and accidents, but some of them include much more complex incidents. There was an occasion where she very narrowly missed being kidnapped and murdered, and yet it happened to another girl just a few minutes after her. Some of her brushes with death are due to motherhood, are due to labours that were mismanaged and botched in a system which just doesn't have enough resources to take care of you all the time. And some of them were through choices that she had made herself. Most notably, the ones that have really stuck in my brain are the ones where she has gone wild swimming, and it was really interesting to me because I think there are 3 separate brushes with death in this book that all relate to water. One of them when she's very young and she's drunk and she jumps off a pier, but 2 others where she gets pulled into an undercurrent when she's swimming in the sea, and yet she still repeatedly throughout this memoir unapologetically goes back to the water and does the thing that she wants to do because she doesn't let the fear hold her back, even though the fear kind of rules her entire life. And that's really what this memoir is about. It's really about the idea of fear and what it is for, and how each of these instances is so huge in your life and so terrifying at the time that it happens, and then your brain automatically just switches off to that thing that happened to you and it puts it away. And when we are happy, we don't remember the horrible or the fearful things that happened to us. And so it's a way that fear comes to live in your body and becomes a part of you, and that is something that I very much recognise in my experience. I am a much more cautious and fearful person than I ever used to be before I ended up with chronic illness. I really recognise this occasional crippling sensation of not knowing what's coming, of some sort of anticipation of something going wrong, but never knowing what it is, and yet always knowing it's around the corner. And as has been proved repeatedly in Maggie's life, it has just been round the corner. The turns of phrase in here are just so beautiful that you almost kind of get lulled in a few chapters into actually forgetting what has happened. So the mechanism that Maggie's living through, this forgetting when times are good that there's something bad is coming, also kind of happens to you as a reader. You get pulled in by these pretty phrases and stuff, and then something horrifying will happen and you'll be like, holy crap. Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. This is kind of like the how and the why of life and the fear that sits in between, and I just love it. So that is it, guys. Those are all of the memoirs that I think that you should check out if you liked I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Every single one of these memoirs is just as poignant and just as worth your time as this one is. If you have made it this far through the video, then leave me the little house emoji down below, and you can choose whether it's the happy house or the broken down house. As always, if you have read any of the books that I've talked about here today, then please tell me about them down below, and I would absolutely chew your hand off for any recommendations of memoirs which you have loved, because it really is one of my favourite genres in the world. Don't forget to check out Anna Louisa and their Mother's Day sale using my code LiteraryDiversions20 at checkout for 20% off. If you are new here and you would like more recommendations for what to read when you've finished your favourite books, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you're already subscribed and you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you soon, guys. Bye!